Hi, I'm Dave from Krieghoff UK. In this video we're going to be looking at how to replace the trigger on a Krieghoff K80. It's also relevant for the Krieghoff K20. Now you may want to exchange your trigger. There are different triggers available, including the standard nickel triggers, the titanium lightweight triggers, also gold plated, and they're all available in the standard or forward position triggers. Okay, so let's get started. Now always check that the gun is unloaded and safe before you begin. And as we're going to be rotating the trigger guard out the way to then remove the trigger, I'd recommend that we take the stock off first. This is because the guard could damage the stock as it rotates, or you might find you need to flex the guard to get it past the woodwork, and this could damage it as well. So using your 5mm hex or Allen wrench for the stock, you can usually insert this through the hole in the pad. But if yours hasn't got a hole in, you'd have to remove the pad to gain access to the stock bolt hole. You can feel when the bolt disconnects with the action. So carefully remove the stock, and a little tip is to keep the wrench in the stock. This way the wrench is connected into the stock bolt and it's easier to locate later on. Now set this to one side. And here you have the mechanism exposed. Another little tip is to make sure that the gun is cocked when you're doing this. This gives the trigger mechanism a little bit of play, which allows the trigger blade to slide off a little bit more easily when we get to that stage next. So we're going to be removing this screw here, which is the trigger guard screw. Now take care and attention at this stage, using the correct tools and a good positive fit into the slotted screw when doing this, otherwise you're going to risk damaging the screw when you do it. And also take note about the position of the slot, and when we put the screw back in later on, we're going to match this up and make sure it's in line as it was. So a good tip is to hold the barrels under your arm, and the action with the same hand gives you a good firm hold. Now using the driver, make sure that's in the slot, and with a good amount of pressure, just remove the screw. Now place the screw to one side so you don't lose it, and rotate the guard off the action. And you'll see between the guard and the action there's a little washer. Place that next to the screw and rotate that 180 degrees, and that's out the way now. So if you look at the trigger, you'll see two screws. The front one, that's the selector. Now using a 1.27mm Allen wrench, we first start by unscrewing the front selector screw. Now we slacken the selector screw so we can see about 2 threads, just so it's out of the way, as when it is tightened up it does interfere with the trigger blade slot. Next up we're going to be slackening the rear screw, which holds the trigger in position. Now take a mental note of where the trigger blade is positioned, and we'll try to repeat that when we put the next trigger on. But don't worry about it too much, because you can fine tune the position when the trigger guard and the stock's back on. Press the selector in and slide it out. And once it's removed, you can simply exchange it for a different trigger blade. We're replacing it for a titanium trigger. You'll see that the triggers have a specific profile known as a T-slot. Older Krieghoffs may have a dovetail fitting. You can contact us for availability of parts and fitting instructions on the older models if this is the case. Fit this back on, push the selector down, and you can easily slot the new titanium trigger back in place. Now we've got that in position, we're going to start with the rear screw. Tighten until you feel resistance. Now the front screw, if you tighten this all the way in until you feel resistance, that's when the selector's locked off. If you want the selector back active again, simply slacken the screw by half a turn and always test it to make sure it is working again. Now, that's the trigger blade back in place. We rotate the guard, but before we do, we make sure the little washer is back where it should be. Make sure that's correct, in the correct position. Fit the slotted screw back in place. You can do a few turns to just make sure it's in with your hand. Then same again, barrels under your arm, holding with your hand and tighten up with the driver. You can feel it when it's tight and make sure the slot is aligned as it was. So that's the trigger guard back in place. Now we're going to be putting the stop back on, so just take care to align this correctly. Okay, so the stop's all aligned and we're going to be tightening the stop bolt back up now. We'd always say between 7 and 10 turns is safe. Any more than 10 and the stop bolt can go into the action mechanism and cause issues. So we'll just make sure and we'll count if we do this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, and that is nice and tight back on the action. And that's the trigger blade exchanged. So it's very simple, it's just you need to take care on simple things like when you're removing the screw from the trigger guard, and just make sure you're setting it back to normal. And like I say, you can fine tune the trigger position once the gun is back together again. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments box below or send us an email. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.